name is Sheila Lynch, and I serve as the Director of Regional Planning and Development at Denver Regional Council of Governments. We're excited to share information today about how local governments can participate in the Regional Housing Needs Assessment and how this participation can allow local governments to satisfy the new state law for conducting housing needs assessments. We'll be recording the webinar today, and we'll make it available on DRCOG's website. We will be, as we dive into today's content, we encourage you to engage with us throughout the session. If you have questions during the presentation, please enter them into the Q&A chat box that you should see at the bottom of your screen. We'll be addressing as many of these questions as we can during the dedicated Q&A segment at the end of the webinar. And before I pass off to my two colleagues, Caitlin Service and Zach Feldman, who will be walking us through the content for today's webinar, I want to share an overview of what we'll cover. So we plan to provide background information about DRCOG's process for developing a regional housing needs assessment. We'll also be sharing the findings of the needs assessment. And then we'll take some time to walk through the process that local governments will need to follow to officially participate in the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And then lastly, we'll go over a number of different resources that DRCOG will provide to assist local governments during this review process, including a demo of our data dashboard. Well, all right, let's get started, and I will pass it on to Caitlin Service.
Thanks, and good morning. I'm Caitlin Service. I'm the Program Manager of Regional Planning for DRCOG. And we'll first start off with MetroVision. So MetroVision is the Denver region's long-range plan for growth and development. It was unanimously adopted by DRCOG's board, so it reflects a shared vision from all 59 member governments. And a key outcome of MetroVision is ensuring that diverse housing options meet the needs of residents of all ages, income, and abilities, allowing people to stay in their communities as their life changes. So to get there, the plan calls for 3 key housing objectives. The first being diversifying the region's housing stock, the second, increasing the supply of housing attainable to a variety of households, and the third being expanding opportunities for housing near multimodal transportation options. So I start with this because these goals have guided our regional approach to housing and inform the work behind the housing assessment and all the housing work that is underway. The Regional Housing Needs Assessment was initiated by the DRCOG Board of Directors in response to growing housing challenges across our whole region. It was initiated in 2023, and the purpose of the assessment is to provide a shared data-driven foundation to understand how much housing do we need, where do we need it, and at what price points. With housing needs assessments, attention is sometimes focused on precise numbers coming out of the assessment, but we want to keep kind of everything in perspective, that it's not just about that precise number, it's about understanding the scale and scope of housing need so we can ultimately develop a strategy that matches the reality on the ground. And also, when we talk about housing, it's important to remember that housing markets are regional, so they don't stop at city or county lines. People make decisions about where to live based on a whole wide range of factors, including jobs, affordability, schools, amenities, childcare, all the things that make up daily life. And those things often span multiple jurisdictions. And so housing demand, the nature of it, also crosses jurisdictional boundaries. And this regional approach helps us better understand some of the shared challenges and helps us to work together on solutions. And this regional housing needs assessment was a true collaborative effort shaped by input from a wide range of stakeholders, local governments, developers, advocates, community organizations, finance experts, and more. There was an advisory group that met throughout the project to guide the approach and identify some key barriers to housing. And in total, around 200 participants shared insights. This broad engagement helped us to better understand the complexity of the region's housing challenges, and that's reflected in the housing needs assessment. And it also helped us lay the groundwork for future coordinated solutions. And the housing needs assessment is just the first step in a broader process to address housing challenges, and that process is illustrated here. So at the beginning, we have the needs assessment. First, we're analyzing unmet housing demand and growth. Next, we have the strategy, where we identify strategies and build consensus around initiatives to address housing barriers. And then ultimately, some components will be integrated into the regional plans. So integrating the housing strategies into broader plans like MetroVision or the regional transportation plan to better integrate them in the work that's going on. So the timeline on the right side of the screen kind of gives more detail about where we are. I mentioned regional housing needs assessment wrapped up in 2024, and the housing strategy has just kicked off and is underway, expected to be under development through about January 2026. And down the line, these pieces can be incorporated into regional plans for guiding future growth. Another more recent benefit of the regional housing needs assessment. So now it offers a pathway for our local governments to comply with a requirement of Senate Bill 174. In May of 2024, the state of Colorado passed Senate Bill 174. It's also known as the Sustainable Affordable Housing Assistance Act. And the legislation requires local governments to complete a housing needs assessment that conforms to some specific methodologies developed by the Colorado Department of Local Affairs, or DOLA. And the deadline for creating these state compliant assessments is December 31st of 2026. However, local governments are exempt from this requirement if they participate in a regional housing needs assessment that complies with DOLA's methodology. So this regional housing needs assessment was developed before the legislation was passed, but thankfully the legislation allows a path for compliance for already existing housing needs assessments, as long as the existing assessment is not older than January 1st of 2022. So our regional assessment does meet that requirement based on our 2024 creation date. And DRCOG has followed the process outlined in the legislation to get the regional assessment accepted by DOLA for compliance. We submitted the assessment to DOLA by their December 31st, 2024 deadline. We've received notice from DOLA that the assessment is conditionally approved for substantial conformance. And we're committed to following proper steps to ensure that the regional assessment is in compliance with state requirements and that local governments in the DRCOG region can use this regional assessment for compliance with this needs assessment requirement of Senate Bill 174 if they choose to participate in the 60-day review period. So that's a little bit of the legislative context and a little bit of the context on the foundation of the regional housing needs assessment, but I'll go ahead and pass it on to Zach to get more into the key findings of the regional housing needs assessment.
So we will quickly go through some of the key findings, and then after a little more information about participation, we will circle back to do a demo of the dashboard, which contains a lot of the data out of the assessment. Next slide. So just an update on the status of compliance of the needs assessment. So DRCOG staff submitted this to DOLA in December 2024 before the deadline for existing assessments. And we received that review back in February. So we had conditional approval of the assessment with a few changes needed to reach substantial conformity, where substantial conformity is DOLA's kind of approval status. April of this year, we updated the data and also made some of those changes that were asked of us by DOLA in that review. Next slide. Just to give an update in terms of how the numbers may have changed, if folks have looked at the dashboard previously, numbers have shifted around a little bit because we updated the data inputs, so new census data, employment and housing data, zoning data, development data, and also incorporated new state demography office forecasts. Additionally, we switched the area median income thresholds to match up with HUD breakpoints, which are a requirement of 174. However, these updates did not lead to major changes in the need estimates. They were relatively minor changes of those estimates. Next slide. Just a quick rundown of some of the key findings. One is that the region really has not produced enough housing to keep up with population and job growth, particularly since 2008, 2009. We've really not recovered from that lack of housing construction during that period, even though we see around the region areas of increased production. Low-income households, so below 50% of area median income, represent the greatest need for additional housing. And aging population and smaller households are being forecast by the Demography Office, and that will require a potentially more diverse housing stock going forward. And finally, that housing types and affordability are unevenly distributed across the region. Next slide. Here we see the big number out of the needs assessment. So by 2050, we're estimating 500,000 new housing units will be needed. And this is really just coming from demand minus supply. So estimating how many households we will have in 2050, and then estimating how many housing units we will have in 2050. Based on the current housing stock. If we look at a shorter time window, 2032, so roughly a 10-year period, we're looking at 223,000 new units. Next slide. Here we see a breakdown of current and future needs. So future need includes the growth in the number of households going forward. Current need includes estimates of household creation. So where households creation may have slowed because of the lack of available housing. Additionally, accounting for unhoused households. Next slide. And here we see the breakout by area median income. So we see that while a very large portion of the housing stock is at higher AMI levels, a lot of the estimated need is going to fall in those lowest AMI bins, so the lowest household income levels. And a lot of this we can think about coming from the fact that those are the households that are most severely housing burdened and are paying the largest portion of their income to rent. So that's kind of why so much need is estimated at those AMI levels. Next slide. The submarket and then the local housing need is allocated using kind of the same formula. So current and future population, current and future employment, current transit, future transit, commute times, affordable units, and vacancy rates. So these are the pieces that go into estimating need at lower geographies. So first in the region to the submarkets, and then from the submarket to the local housing. Some jurisdictions are going to land in different submarkets because of the way the census geographies are set up, but all of the estimation is actually happening at the census block level, so that it's consistent for jurisdictions that cross those submarket boundaries. Next slide. And here I will pass back.
Thanks, Zach. So now that we have kind of reviewed some of the key findings of the regional assessment, we can talk a little bit more about how local governments can participate in the assessment if they choose to go that route for state compliance. So to reorient ourselves a little bit, the legislation requires local governments in Colorado to complete a state compliant housing needs assessment by December 31st, 2026. But local governments don't have to conduct their own assessment if they participate in a regional housing needs assessment. So there are some exemptions for municipalities with population less than 1,000, or if you're experiencing population decline. But for most of the municipalities in the DRCOG region, this legislation applies. So how to participate? The legislation outlines this process that local governments in the DRCOG region can use with the Regional Housing Needs Assessment in order to meet this requirement of Senate Bill 174. There's really two key components, and that is review and comment. So first, your local government's governing body must review the Regional Housing Needs Assessment at a public meeting during a defined 60-day review period. Second, your jurisdiction must submit comments to DRCOG during that defined 60-day review period. So our review period will run from July 14th through September 12th, 2025. This process comes directly from the legislation, and by completing these steps within that window, your community can use the regional assessment to fulfill the housing need assessment requirement under Senate Bill 174. It's a pretty straightforward process, but it's also time sensitive, so important to plan ahead to ensure that your governing body has time to review and provide comment during that 60-day period. We have heard from our member governments that it's really important to know pretty far in advance to prepare for the governing body review and for planning out the timeline. So that's why we're talking about this today in April, about the review period that will begin on July 14th. And here's how your local government can submit materials to DRCOG during that 60-day review period, which runs from July 14th through September 12th. You can submit your materials by emailing them to metrovision@drcog.org. DRCOG then compiles them and we submit them to DOLA at the conclusion of the 60-day review period. Again, this is all just following what's outlined in the legislation. And to indicate your compliance to DOLA, we recommend that your submittal include some key components. First, comments, so your jurisdiction's comments on the assessment from that review of the governing body from your public meeting, and then also some indication that your governing body reviewed the assessment at a public meeting, so indicating the date, time, location of the public meeting that was included in that review, and then submitting these materials in a 60-day window. If I haven't repeated these dates enough yet, here they are again. So key dates that you'll want to keep on your radar, July 14th through September 12th. This is the official 60-day review period. During this window, your local government must review the Regional Housing Needs Assessment at a public meeting and submit comments to DRCOG in order to use the regional assessment for compliance with this requirement of Senate Bill 174. September 12th is the last day to submit those comments to DRCOG. So if your jurisdiction hasn't submitted by this date, it won't be able to use the regional assessment in place of conducting your own state compliant local assessment. And then December 31st, 2026, this is the deadline in the legislation that if local governments did not participate in the 60-day review period, they need to have their own state compliant housing needs assessment by this date. So there are many, many dates and deadlines and components in Senate Bill 174. These are just the ones that are relevant to the 60-day review process in the DRCOG region if local governments choose to participate in it. But it's not comprehensive of everything in the full legislation. So recommend checking out DOLA's website for other deadlines and components of 174 that aren't listed here. And DRCOG support. So we want to help you if you choose to use the Regional Housing Needs Assessment to comply with the Housing Needs Assessment component of Senate Bill 174. We want to support you however we can. We have some sample materials that will be posted on our website today. Sample language for staff report if you want to copy and paste some components from, our document into your own staff report. We have language on our website available to do that. That will be posted this afternoon. We have the same for PowerPoint slides. So if you are putting together a presentation to your local government on the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, we have some starter PowerPoint slides that you can take from to use if you choose. And then office hours. So there will be a link for office hours to sign up for a one-on-one meeting with DRCOG staff. Every meeting has someone from the data team, such as Zach, who just presented, and from the planning team, such as myself or someone else on my team, who can answer any questions that you have, talk about anything that's on your mind, and support you however we can. So we have many hours set aside each week, ongoing for 6 weeks, and we would be happy to extend that if there's more demand to do so. So these links to all these materials will be sent to all webinar registrants in an email today following the webinar. And Zach mentioned the Regional Housing Needs Assessment Dashboard that is available, that has a lot of the data components from the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, along with jurisdiction-specific information. So I will pass the screen share off to him to kind of walk through how to use that.
So I wanted to start by pointing out where on DRCOG's website all of this information before can be found. So there's a Regional Housing Needs Assessment website. It has updates. It has the link to today's webinar. It has some overview of the assessment. It also has the overall report and all the appendices, including a technical appendix. And then it has a link here to the assessment dashboard. This may have typed out, but it'll take just a second. So our needs assessment overall includes both the report, all the appendices, and this dashboard. This dashboard really helps us kind of get the data out there. When you land on this dashboard, there's an overview of kind of how the assessment was created. And then on the left here, you'll see where jurisdictions could be selected. It defaults to the submarkets, but you can delete all those out and put in whichever jurisdictions you're interested in. Additionally, any jurisdictions you pick and you click this download data button, it's going to download an Excel sheet. And if you click download PowerPoint, which we'll come back to both of those at the end, it's going to download a pre-filled slide deck with all of the charts for the jurisdictions selected. As we move across, we first see the submarkets and all of the jurisdictions. It also has a table form, and then a brief overview of how those were created. Next, we get to local need. It gives the 10-year need by AMI bins for the selected jurisdictions, which in this case is the submarkets, and it has a little bit of documentation to explain how these are created. And again, the main report has more of that information than is in this dashboard. Next up, we have the key trends. These can be really helpful for messaging. So we see housing burden, and we see that it has increased drastically across all of the submarkets. A lot of this data has been in the dashboard from the beginning, and also some of this we added after the review by DOLA for the needs assessments compliance with 174. And if we go to this supplemental, it has kind of additional information, particularly for 174 compliance. So we have need by renters, owners, and then we have a displacement risk map using Colorado Department of Public Health, their EnviroScreen score. And again, some data sources. So before we stop, I'm going to quickly share what those downloads look like. So we'll first click on the Excel sheet. And we can see that all the data is here in the sheets for the selected. So here we selected submarket, so it has submarket data. All of it is, the data is included, so you don't need to be worried about trying to kind of guess by looking at the charts in the dashboard. All the raw data is included in the Excel files. And as we click on the slide deck, we can see that all of the charts are included. So here, all of the charts are the 5 submarkets. If you clicked one jurisdiction, there would be one jurisdiction's data here. So these will be specific to which jurisdictions you pick. And if you pick one, it'll be just one jurisdiction's data shown in these old slides. It's back to Caitlin.
Thanks. And I have some instructions up here on the screen that if you're ever going back to review this webinar to figure out how to access that dashboard and download some of the charts for your staff report or presentation to your local government's governing body. Here's just like a quick instructional thing that you can kind of go back and reference that includes some of the key charts that you might want to use in a report. And to wrap us up here, next steps, if your jurisdiction chooses to participate in the regional assessment for compliance with the housing needs assessment portion of Senate Bill 174, some next steps to get you started, reviewing those materials on the DRCOG site. Again, we have sample language for a staff report that you could copy and paste into your own staff report, some sample slides that you could take from, downloading the charts from the dashboard that Zach just walked you through. Signing up for office hours, like I mentioned, there will be a link sent out to everyone after this webinar that allows you to sign up for a meeting with DRCOG's staff, talk through any questions that you might have, and then these steps for indicating compliance to DOLA, putting this review on an agenda of a public meeting of your governing body in that defined 60-day review period, which runs from July 14th through September 12th this year, and reviewing that regional needs assessment at a public meeting and submitting your comments to DRCOG no later than September 12th. So that's a little wrap up to get you going. We will get into the Q&A really shortly, but first some frequently asked questions that we've been asked by our member governments kind of leading up to this point. So what does the participation in this 60-day review period provide? It allows the jurisdiction to use the regional housing needs assessment for the required housing needs assessment, and local governments are exempt from the requirement to conduct a state compliant needs assessment if they participate in the regional needs assessment. Does participation in the regional needs assessment prevent the production of a local needs assessment? No. A jurisdiction can decide to produce a local needs assessment and participate in the regional assessment. And then this one, does participation in the regional needs assessment limit the incorporation of a compliant or non-compliant local needs assessment into the subsequently required housing action plan that's required by Senate Bill 174? And the answer to that is no, based on our understanding of conversations with DOLA, that a jurisdiction can incorporate a local needs assessment and other reports into the housing action plan with or without participation in the regional needs assessment. And then just noting that if a local jurisdiction within the DRCOG region does not conduct that public review of the assessment during the 60-day public review period, they cannot use the regional assessment in lieu of conducting their own state compliant assessment. So really important to meet these steps within that defined 60-day window if you're choosing to use the regional assessment for compliance with state legislation. So with that, we will head over to the Q&A, and Sheila's going to lead us through some of the questions that have been entered into the chat. And if you have any more remaining questions, we have plenty of time to answer them. So please keep them coming if there's anything on your mind.
Great, wonderful. Thank you, Caitlin. Yeah, so we have a few questions that have come up. The first one, I'll just repeat it, is there a DRCOG needs assessment PowerPoint presentation that local governments can use at a public meeting? And we have a couple different resources for you. As Caitlin noted, we will have sample slides that you can use during your presentation before your governing body that provides just background information and information on the process and the findings of the needs assessment. In addition, Zach walked us through a demo where you can actually go to the data dashboard and create additional slides with information and data about your jurisdiction and any other jurisdiction or at the regional level as well. Caitlin, we have a question for you. Here's the question. We recently adopted a housing plan/needs assessment. Will participating in the DRCOG assessment through this process limit our ability to implement our existing plan?
Yeah, that's a great question. So using the regional assessment for compliance with Senate Bill 174 does not prevent local governments from pursuing their own housing work, and jurisdictions can incorporate your local needs assessment and other reports into their housing action plan with or without participation in the regional assessment.
Great, thank you. All right, another one coming your way, Caitlin. Once the regional housing needs assessment is approved by DOLA, does the approval automatically extend to all participating jurisdictions in the region, or is review approval individualized? A lot in that question, but I'm sure you can break it down for us.
Yes, that is a great question. So the regional housing needs assessment, when it achieves substantial conformity to DOLA's requirements, our understanding is that is extended to all local governments in the region who participate according to the legislation. So if your jurisdiction goes through the 60-day review period, at a public meeting by your governing body and submits comments to DRCOG within that 60-day review period, then the compliance status of the RHNA or Regional Housing Needs Assessment, you have that for your jurisdiction. So each jurisdiction, each of the 59 municipalities in the DRCOG region don't have to go through it individually after they participate in the 60-day review period.
Great, thank you for that. So another one that Caitlin, I think might be good for you to answer is what comes after the housing needs assessment requirement for next steps of compliance with state requirements?
That's a good question. So there is a housing action plan specified in Senate Bill 174. This webinar, the topic of this webinar wasn't really about the housing action plans. We're trying to get through this first component first, but I would check on the DOLA site and look up the requirements for the housing action plan that local governments are required by the legislation to create subsequent to the housing needs assessment. That's kind of the major component of 174 that, you know, builds off of this regional housing needs assessment or the housing needs assessment. There are other things in the bill that I would watch out for as a local government, including the water supply and strategic growth element updates in your master plans or comprehensive plans. Those are kind of the main components of 174. Like I said, there's a lot in that legislation, and DOLA's provided a lot of webinars and guidance and resources on their website to kind of help municipalities navigate through that. And this specific webinar was focused on the needs assessment component of 174 and how to participate in the regional assessment if you choose to do that for that component of the requirement. But this is a good question because there is a lot else in the bill to look out for.
Great, thank you. Well, here's a question that we can do our best to answer, and I wonder if this might be something we want to consult with DOLA on. The question is public comment required at the public meeting? So what we have read in the bill is that the requirement is that a local government review the regional housing needs assessment at a public meeting of their governing body. So the bill doesn't specifically call out public comment. There's a couple different things that we might suggest, and that is we can certainly circle back to DOLA and get clarity from them on this question. And also, since this bill didn't allow for rulemaking through DOLA, I think your city and county attorney are really great resources for you to walk through some of the questions as well. All right, I'm going to go on to the next question. So if we do not participate in the presentation and review during the review period, do we lose the ability to rely on this regional assessment to meet the planning obligation? Caitlin, do you want to take this one?
All right, yes. So DOLA has indicated that after the 60-day review period has passed, local governments will no longer have the option to use the regional assessment in lieu of conducting their own state compliant local assessment. So it's really important that local governments review the assessment during the defined 60-day window if they'd like the option to use the assessment to comply with the legislation. It is like important to note that if you do participate in the regional housing needs assessment 60-day review and then later decide that you want to use your own state compliant local assessment to meet this requirement of 174, there's nothing that would prohibit you from doing so. So you would have, you would have complied twice instead of complying once, and you can use your state compliant local assessment in lieu of your previously reviewed regional assessment. So review of the assessment during the 60-day review period does keep your options most open and most flexible. But our understanding is that after the 60-day review period has passed, that you cannot use the regional assessment in lieu of conducting your own assessment to meet the requirement of the bill.
Great. So we have another question, comment and question. So agree that housing markets are regional, but the local review is at a municipal level, not the regional level. What resources are available to have a sub-region take up the next step after the housing needs assessment as a region rather than individually? Caitlin, do you want to start with that?
Sure. So review at the local level, not at the regional level. So the resources available for the region to take the next step after the H&A rather than individually.
And I wonder if some of what we're speaking to is the next steps after assessments is the requirement to do some planning. And it does, the way the law is structured, it focuses on the local planning effort. I can give a little bit of overview of what we're doing at DRCOG for our next step with regional housing needs assessment. So when we started this work, we started in 2023, and our intention, based on conversations with our local governments and our board, was that we wanted to start with an assessment to understand the scale and scope of housing need. And then from there, probably the more important work was we wanted to come together and create a space to identify regionally scaled strategies. So these would be things that what we've heard from our local governments is there's some aspects of tackling housing need that can't be taken on at the local level, nor does it make sense to take it on at each local level. There may be some opportunity and synergies to be working together. And so that's where our regional housing strategy is going to focus. What are some of those regionally scaled strategies? Within that, I do anticipate some conversations about we know that housing need looks a little different at different parts of the region. So some of that may go down to the sub-regional level. And so I think this question and comment it's a really great question in that, can we still be working at even sub-regional levels and taking actions on at that level? I think it's a great idea. And we can certainly check in with DOLA to see how that aligns with the requirements of the bill and how they see that. But it certainly seems like a great place to be and to start within your subregions. Anything else to add, Caitlin?
No, I think you've covered that quite well. Thanks.
Awesome. All right, so we have another one. What is the nature of the comments you anticipate receiving from the jurisdiction? How are the comments going to be used? Great question. Caitlin, do you want to respond to that one?
Sure, yeah. So I'll kind of answer in two parts. So part of what we're doing here is a compliance exercise, right? Participation in the 60-day review window allows a local government to use the regional housing needs assessment in lieu of conducting their own state compliant assessment by December of 2026. So per the legislation, DRCOG is to compile those comments and to submit them to DOLA within a 60-day period after the 60-day review period. And that is what the legislation tells us to do with the comments, and that is what we will do. We'll compile them and submit them to DOLA. Like from a more purposeful perspective, DRCOG is always looking to engage with local governments and hear your thoughts on the regional housing needs assessment or any further local context from your community, or how we can approach a housing strategy. So we would love to hear any comments that you have on the regional housing needs assessment or just housing in general. Engage and strategize together to kind of tackle this big regional challenge. So kind of two parts there, the mechanical compliance version of it, and then also the housing work at DRCOG. We're always looking for that to be more collaborative in nature. And so welcome your comments. Regarding the nature of the comments, the legislation doesn't quite say. So that is open-ended for your municipality to determine.
Great, thank you. All right, another question, and this one is for Zach. Has DRCOG documented the existing housing inventory by AMI levels, and especially those units that are under a deed restriction?
Yes, I'll address some of it and then pass off to Corey to make sure I don't say something technically not quite right. So we don't have an exhaustive list of deed restricted units. That's not something that is available at the regional level. In terms of the existing inventory, we do know the AMI, but it's in a sense estimated because we have better data on the number and location of housing units than we do of their costs. So a lot of that is coming in from the modeling process. But I'll pass off to Corey to let me know if some of that was not quite right.
Yeah, no, that's all totally correct. What I would just add there is that we are looking at existing housing units by AMI at the regional level to come up with our need estimates to get that supply component that we then compare to demand. But yeah, that specifically the data that we're using there is at a larger geography that's not going to be available to most jurisdictions. But that's where we do have those kind of unit breakdowns by AMI coming in. It's just going to be available more at that larger regional level that we use in our need estimation.
Great. Thanks, Corey. Thanks, Zach. So here's another question, and I am just going to open this up, and whoever wants to jump in on this one. Our community has already opted into Prop 123 for increased housing goal of 3% each year and have engaged our local partners to complete a community housing strategy with over 40 organizations. Can we use this data in our update to DRCOG while we attempt to hop on the DRCOG Regional Housing Needs Assessment?
I can take that one. So Senate Bill 174 has multiple components. So the one that we're speaking about today is the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, and that is to understand the scale and scope of housing need in the region. The secondary component of that, or the subsequent component that the bill requires, is a housing action plan. So that is required by local governments by January 1st of 2028 and every 6 years after, to address housing needs, zoning density, development, displacement mitigation, legislative considerations, intergovernmental coordination. So I anticipate that what you're describing here regarding what you're doing to increase your housing goal of 3% each year, and how you're implementing that, that seems to fall into the strategy portion or into the action plan portion, rather than the needs assessment is to understand the scale and scope of the issue and is more quantitative and analytical in nature. What you're describing would be more strategy for incorporation into the action plan. So we're not the authority on action plans or interpreting 174, but that's my understanding of where that specific effort that you described would fit into this process with 174.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin. So Zach, I am going to send this question your way, and I'm thinking maybe you can speak to data availability on this one. The needs assessment does not tackle disability. What exactly is the issue with that, and how should a municipality tackle that portion of the needs assessment? And perhaps you can talk about how DRCOG addressed that in our needs assessment.
Yeah, so I think just like the last question, I'm gonna answer part of it and then pass off to Corey to make sure we get the technical pieces right. So for us, this kind of falls into the portion of the bill where if publicly available data does not exist, we're really not able to provide those estimates. So what is asked for is an estimate of need for housing by disabled individuals or households with disabled individuals. And the issue is that we don't have the supply side of that. So for the rest of our estimation around need, we know how many housing units there are, we know how many households there are. Here we have estimates of disability from the ACS. They do a version of that at a different geography that has estimates of disability, but we don't have any information really locally or regionally that's going to give us the supply side. So which units would be appropriate for different types of disabled individuals.
Yeah, that's totally correct, Zach. And I'll just add what we've included in the dashboard is we're able to compile some of those estimates at the county level based on the distribution of having disability by age and projecting that into the future from the State Demography Office's single year of age forecasts. So that's where we're able to come up with a rough estimate of currently and in the future how many individuals with disabilities there will be. But like Zach said, that's really just speaking to the demand for these kind of units without the supply component.
Great. Thank you, Zach and Corey, for that. Caitlin, I have a question for you. Is a local, county, or city HUD housing needs assessment state compliant?
That's a good question, and it kind of depends on which housing needs assessment that you're asking about. So the legislation 174 outlines required baseline components that are required to be in your housing needs assessment, and then also outlines a methodology that needs to be incorporated into your housing needs assessment. So that guidance was issued by DOLA on December 31st of 2024 was their deadline to create and publish that guidance. And so you would have to look at your specific needs assessment that you're inquiring about to see if it complies with that, and submit it to DOLA for compliance review. I mentioned before, there was a deadline of December 31st, 2024 to submit any pre-existing needs assessments to DOLA for compliance review. So perhaps that has already been completed for your needs assessment. And if not, I encourage you to get in touch with DOLA staff and submit for compliance prior to the December 31st, 2026 deadline, to get an understanding of, you know, whether your needs assessment includes those baseline components required by the bill and also follows the specific methodology that DOLA has determined in their guidance, and they would review and provide comments, or provide a determination of substantial compliance based on how well your needs assessment aligns with their requirements.
Thanks, Caitlin. All right, here's another question. Have you heard any compelling reasons not to participate in the regional assessment? Are there any downsides other than the required effort? So I might break down and answer in a couple different ways. So Senate Bill 174 requires communities larger than 1,000 in population to do local housing needs assessments. So if you're a community that is a smaller community, less than 1,000 people, you may want to look at the bill more closely, because if you participate in the regional housing needs assessment, it may kick in requirements then for action planning. So that's something that I just want to note if you're a smaller community. As far as, you know, the benefits, I mean, certainly the benefits are, there is a regional housing needs assessment that is, you know, has been conducted. And so the effort would be to do the review during the 60-day window. As far as downsides, there aren't tremendous downsides from our perspective, in that even if you do your local housing needs assessment and you don't participate in a regional, there is reference in the bill of referring to any existing regional housing needs assessments. So I think the only downside would be, at DRCOG, we certainly want it to be the local government's choice to participate in the regional. We are not requiring or are even strongly advocating that you participate. We're just pointing out that it is something that you can lean on. And if you have any questions, we're willing to meet with you one-on-one and to reflect on those more specific to your community. All right, so next question, Caitlin, I think this is something that you could answer. After holding the public meeting, what materials should we anticipate emailing to DRCOG? Is it just public comments received, or do you require an approved resolution or some other documentation?
Yes, great question. So the legislation specifies that local governments in the region can use the regional assessment for compliance if the local government's governing body reviews the regional needs assessment at a public meeting and submits comments to DRCOG during a defined 60-day review period. So it does not require, it doesn't specify that public comment is needed. It doesn't specify that an approved resolution is needed. Your jurisdiction should determine or consult with your legal advisor or city county attorney to determine what you officially want to submit as your comment. We suggest just submit the comments and submit some indication that the public meeting occurred and that the review by the governing body occurred. So include the date, time, location of public meeting and review. Regarding like resolution or minutes or, something like that. A resolution indicates that a formal action has occurred from the governing body, which legislation doesn't specifically specify that is required. For something like minutes, we know that there's like often a delay in the minutes becoming official because someone has to write up those minutes and review them again with the governing body. Then they have to approve the minutes before they're the official minutes. And we're also working on this 60-day time period. So I wouldn't get caught up too much in like these like official documentation of like what to submit, but just making sure that the meeting occurs within that 60-day window and that your jurisdiction submits comments within that 60-day window, including date, time, location of the public meeting and review, and not let any, feelings that you need to have official documents delay your submission of your materials.
Great, thank you. All right, I think we've worked through all the questions that we had in the Q&A box. So I think we'll round out the webinar. First, I just want to say thank you for attending. We hope this was helpful and informative. Wanted to remind you of a couple things. We did record the webinar, so we'll make this available on our website. We also, Caitlin mentioned in the presentation, will be conducting office hours. So you'll have a follow-up email from us with a link to sign up for office hours if that would be helpful to your community. I also just wanted to mention that Logan put in the chat a link to a survey. We're trying to ensure that all of the 59 member governments in DRCOG's jurisdiction received information about this public review and has a chance to use this opportunity or not, and they're choosing. And so if you could fill out that survey, it just helps us guide what our local governments kind of plans are, and if there are any ways that we can support you through this process. And then you'll see on the slide, we have contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any specific questions. We also have a link to Senate Bill 174. And DOLA is a wonderful resource as the folks that are helping to facilitate this entire process for the state. And so we do have a link to their website as well. So thanks so much for coming, and we look forward to working with you through this process. Have a great day.